I was the one who planned the dinner. I spent 4 months booking the private room at Rosario's, the Italian restaurant my father had taken us to every birthday since I was 6 years old. I designed the centerpieces myself, cream roses and eucalyptus, arranged in low vases so people could see each other across the table. I wrote the slideshow. I chose the songs. I even ironed the tablecloths myself the morning of, because the rental company had folded them wrong and the creases were bothering me. It was my father's 65th birthday, 30 years of marriage to my mother. A lifetime of what I believed, with my whole chest, was a good and honest life. I wanted the evening to be perfect. I needed it to be. I was the eldest daughter, the one who organized, who remembered, who made sure love was expressed in tangible, beautiful ways. The dinner was perfect, for exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes. And then my father, Harold Eugene Mercer, the man who had read me bedtime stories, who had danced with my mother at every wedding we attended, who had cried at my college graduation, stood up, cleared his throat, and asked for everyone's attention. And what came out of his mouth didn't just break my heart. It rewrote my entire childhood. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what kind of man I thought my father was. My father was, by every outward measure, a remarkable human being. He was a civil engineer who had spent his career designing bridges in the Pacific Northwest. He volunteered at the food bank every Thanksgiving. He remembered every single person's birthday in our extended family, not with a Facebook notification, but with a handwritten card mailed at least 3 days in advance. He was the kind of man who stopped to help strangers change flat tires in the rain. The kind of man other men pointed to when they wanted to say, "That's what integrity looks like." My mother, Joan, adored him. That was the word for it, adored. Not just loved, not merely comfortable, but genuinely, warmly adored. She still touched his hand across the dinner table after 30 years of marriage. She still laughed at his terrible puns. She lit up when she heard his car in the driveway. Growing up, I used to tell my friends that my parents had the kind of marriage I wanted someday. My younger sister Becca said the same thing. We were lucky girls, and we knew it. My father traveled for work sometimes, maybe 3 or 4 trips a year, sometimes a week at a stretch. Infrastructure projects, he explained. Site assessments. Consulting contracts in cities far enough away that he'd stay over rather than drive back. Portland, Sacramento, Denver, occasionally out of state. We never thought anything of it. Engineers travel. That's just the job. He always brought something back. A keychain for Becca. A book for me. A scarf or a candle for my mother. Small things. Thoughtful things. The kind of souvenirs that said, "I was away, but I was thinking of you." I want you to hold that image for a moment. The man with the birthday cards and the souvenirs and the hand holding across the table. I want you to hold it because in a few minutes, I am going to watch it dissolve. Looking back now, there were signs. There are always signs. That's the cruelest part of betrayal. Not the moment of revelation, but the retrospective archaeology of everything you missed. About 8 months before the dinner, my father started acting differently. Subtly, at first, the way a river changes before a flood, in ways you don't notice until the water is already at your door. He became protective of his phone in a way he'd never been before. Not secretive enough to be obvious, but enough that I noticed he would turn the screen away when he texted at the dinner table. I noticed he'd step outside for calls he used to take in the kitchen. I noticed that when I borrowed his car once to drive to the pharmacy, there was a parking receipt in the cup holder from a neighborhood in Seattle I didn't recognize. A residential area, nowhere near a bridge project or a business district. I mentioned it to my mother casually, as a curiosity. She shrugged. "Probably a coffee meeting," she said. "You know how he is with the guys from the old firm." And because I loved her, and because I loved him, I let it go. But it burrowed in somewhere. That small, cold pebble of a thought. The parking receipt in the unfamiliar neighborhood. A few weeks later, Becca called me. She and her husband had gone to a jazz concert in Seattle, a spontaneous last-minute thing, and she'd thought she spotted Dad's car in a parking lot near Capitol Hill. She'd almost called out to him, she said, but then she thought it couldn't be right, because he'd told Mom he was in Spokane for a site review. So she'd talked herself out of it. Wrong car, she'd decided. Wrong color, maybe, she'd convinced herself. She called me laughing about it, this funny little almost moment. I didn't laugh, but I didn't say that either. Instead, I filed it away next to the parking receipt in that part of my brain where I store the things I'm not ready to look at directly. I was good at that. I had my father's talent for compartmentalization, it turned out. I just didn't know it yet. The weeks leading up to the birthday dinner, my father was unusually distracted. He would go quiet in the middle of conversations, staring at a point just past your shoulder with an expression I can only describe now as the face of a man rehearsing something. At the time, I thought he was anxious about turning 65. Retirement loomed. Men get strange about that. I should have asked. I know that now. But I was so busy with the roses and the centerpieces and the slideshow that I didn't stop to look at my father's face long enough to read what was written there. The private room at Rosario's held 32 people that Saturday evening in October. My mother wore a deep burgundy dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She looked beautiful, the kind of beautiful that comes from happiness, from feeling seen and celebrated. She kept squeezing my hand when guests arrived, whispering, "You did all of this," with a gratitude that made my chest ache in the best possible way. My father was warm and funny all evening. He moved from group to group, hugging old colleagues, teasing his brothers, making my grandmother laugh until she dabbed her eyes. He was on, luminously, charismatically on, in a way that made the whole room feel like a gift. The slideshow played, 40 years of photos. My father as a young man, impossibly lean, standing on a construction site with a hard hat tilted back on his head. My parents on their wedding day, both of them mid-laugh, slightly blurry, as if joy was too fast for the camera to catch. Becca and I as children, gap-toothed and sunburned at the Oregon coast. My father at Becca's wedding, dancing with my mother, his forehead resting against hers. People cried. I cried. My father looked at the screen with an expression I mistook, in the moment, for gratitude. Only later would I understand it was something else, something much closer to grief. The main course arrived. Wine was poured. The noise of the room swelled into that particular warmth that happens when food and family and decades of shared memory fill a small space. It was then that my father set down his fork. It was then that he pushed back his chair, slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake. It was then that he stood. The room quieted instinctively. Everyone assumed a toast. Everyone reached for their glass. My mother looked up at him with a soft smile, her hand already lifting her wine, already ready to be celebrated. And I noticed, before he even spoke, that his hands were trembling. He didn't look at my mother when he began speaking. That was the first thing I noticed. He looked at the wall above her head, the way you look at the horizon when you're trying not to drown. "I've been thinking about honesty," he said. His voice was steady. That was the horrible part. His voice was completely, infuriatingly steady. About what it means to spend a life being seen as something you're not sure you've entirely been. The room was absolutely silent. The kind of silence that has texture to it. That presses against your ears. I looked at Becca. She looked at me. Neither of us moved. I love all of you, my father continued. And because I love you, I've decided that 65 is too old to carry this any further. That the weight of a secret is heavier than the weight of its consequences. And I owe you all the truth. My mother lowered her wine glass, slowly, like she already knew the way the body knows things before the mind catches up. 27 years ago, my father said, I met a woman in Portland. Her name is Catherine. And over time, he stopped, started again. We built something I should have ended and didn't. Something I told myself was separate from this life, from this family, from all of you. But it wasn't separate. Nothing is ever separate. I felt the room tilt, not physically, but the way reality tilts when the floor of something you believed in gives way beneath you. There's a moment, a terrible suspended moment, where you're still standing, but you know the ground is gone. That was the moment. I have a son, my father said. He's 24, his name is Marcus. And Catherine, they've both agreed that I can say this tonight, because Marcus has wanted for a long time to know this side of his family. And I have not had the courage until now to make that possible. And then, and this is the part that still makes my hand shake when I think about it, my father turned toward the door of the private dining room, and he raised his hand in a small, beckoning gesture. And in walked a young man I had never seen before in my life. He was tall, dark-haired. He had my father's jaw. He had my father's particular way of holding his shoulders, slightly forward, slightly apologetic. He looked terrified and resolute in equal measure, and he stood in the doorway of the room where I had planned a celebration of my father's life, and he looked at 32 people who had never known he existed, and he said, very quietly, "Hi, I'm sorry to crash the party." There was a sound from my right that I will never unhear as long as I live. It was my mother. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was something smaller and more devastating than either of those things. A single, sharp exhale, like the sound of something puncturing, like the sound of 30 years of a life story tearing cleanly down the center. I felt a coldness move through me then that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It started in my sternum and radiated outward, a hollow, spreading cold, like ice water filling the space where my certainty had been. Every memory I had of my father rearranged itself in an instant. Every business trip, every late call, every souvenir brought back from cities I had never questioned. They were still there in my mind, those memories, but they meant different things now. They had always meant different things. I just hadn't known the language. Becca gripped my hand under the table so hard I felt my knuckles compress. I gripped back. We didn't look at each other. We both looked at our mother, who had not moved, who was staring at my father with an expression I had no word for, an expression that was beyond hurt, beyond shock, beyond anger. It was the expression of a woman watching a familiar landscape reveal itself as a painting, flat, false, a beautiful, painstaking forgery. My uncle, my father's brother, a man of 62 who had never raised his voice at a family gathering in my lifetime, stood up so abruptly that his chair fell back behind him and hit the wall. He pointed at my father and said only one word, low and furious, "Harold." And my father who had trembled when he began, whose voice had been steady only through what I now recognized as the clenched discipline of years of practiced compartmentalization. My father looked at his brother and nodded, as if he deserved it, as if he had already sentenced himself and was simply waiting for the rest of us to catch up. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to. My legs simply moved. I walked to my mother. I put my hand on her shoulder. I felt her whole body shudder once, silently, under my palm. And then she straightened. She looked up at me. And something passed between us in that look that I don't have language for either. Something that was grief and love and the particular sorrow of two women who had trusted the same man completely, discovering simultaneously that trust had been a room with no floor. "We're leaving," I said. I was not speaking to my father. I was speaking to my mother, and to Becca, and to myself. A declaration, not a request. A door closing as decisively as one had just been opened. I took my mother's hand. Becca moved to her other side. We walked out of the private dining room at Rosario's, past the cream roses and the eucalyptus, past the untouched dessert plates, past Marcus, who stepped aside and watched us go with eyes that were my father's eyes in a face I had never seen before and now could not stop seeing. And we walked through the main restaurant and out into the cold October night, and none of us said a single word until we were in the car with the doors closed. And then my mother said, very softly, almost to herself, "The Portland trips." That's where Portland was. In that small, quiet sentence, the realization crystallizing into geography was somehow the thing that finally broke me open. I pressed my hand over my mouth. I felt tears slide down my face in the dark, cold car, parked outside the restaurant where I had spent 4 months planning a celebration for a man I had not, it turned out, ever fully known. What happens after the world rearranges itself? It has been 14 months since my father's 65th birthday dinner. My mother filed for divorce 6 weeks after that night. She did it quietly, efficiently, with the same calm competence she had applied to 30 years of marriage, as if she had simply decided that the energy she had spent on this relationship was now reallocated. She cried. Of course she cried. But she also signed up for a watercolor class and started walking 3 miles every morning, and when I call her on Sundays, she sounds incrementally like herself again. A different self. A self that has been taken apart and is being carefully, stubbornly reassembled. Becca has not spoken to my father. She is resolute about this in a way that is entirely Becca. Not dramatic, not performative, just absolute. A boundary laid down like concrete. She says she may one day be willing to have a conversation. But not yet, not close to yet. My relationship with my father is something I am still honestly trying to understand. I have spoken to him 4 times. The conversations are strange, full of a tenderness I resent feeling and a fury I resent showing, and an exhausting grief that belongs to neither anger nor forgiveness but lives in the complicated territory between them. He has not tried to excuse what he did. That, at least, I can say for him. He has not minimized or rationalized. He has said, repeatedly, that he is sorry in a way that I believe to be true, and that I also know is completely insufficient. Truth and insufficiency can coexist. That is something I have learned. Marcus reached out to me once, by email, about 3 months after the dinner. He wrote carefully, considerately, acknowledging that he had no claim on my time or my grace. He said he had known about us, about me, about Becca, about our mother, for most of his life, that he had not chosen the circumstances of his birth, that he understood if I never wanted to hear from him again. I have not replied. I don't know if I will. I hold the email the way you hold a door that you're not sure yet whether you want to open or close, just hovering there, hand on the handle, in the vertigo of the threshold. What I keep coming back to, in the quiet, is this. My father did not confess because he was caught. There was no discovery, no ultimatum, no incriminating evidence laid bare. He chose to stand up in a room full of the people he loved and tell the truth. Because, as he has since explained, haltingly, Marcus had turned 24 and was asking to be known, to be whole, to exist in the full context of his own life. And my father, faced with his son's need to be real, finally found that the performance had cost more than he could keep paying. I don't know what to do with that. The strange, painful, almost nobility of a man who was capable of extraordinary, sustained deception, and also, finally, of this, of standing up, of saying, here is what is true, and I know it will cost me everything, and I am saying it anyway. Was it brave? Was it cowardly? 27 years too late? Was it, in some complicated and morally exhausting way? Both? These are the questions that keep me awake. I still drive past Rosario's sometimes. I have not been inside since that night. I wonder if I ever will be again, or if that restaurant will always be, for me, the place where I lost the version of my family I thought I had. I planted a garden last spring. I do this sometimes, when something in me needs to work out grief through my hands. I planted it at my mother's house, a long bed of lavender and white cosmos, and something called evening primrose that only blooms after dark. Things that survive difficulty, things that come back even after hard winters. I was on my knees in the dirt, tamping down the roots of a lavender plant, when I started to cry. Not the sharp, acute tears of that October night, but something quieter and more sustained. The kind of crying that is less about devastation and more about the long, patient work of absorbing something enormous. My mother came and sat on the back steps and watched me cry in her garden. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You know, the thing about lavender is that it's better after you cut it back, more full the next season. All that cutting, it looks like damage. But it isn't." I looked at her sitting there in the afternoon light, this woman who had given 30 years of her life to a man who had given 27 of those same years to someone else simultaneously, and I thought, she is going to be okay. Not the same, not unaltered, but okay. I thought, so will I. I thought, I hope. My father chose to confess voluntarily, not because he was caught, but because his secret son needed to exist in the full truth of his own life. Does the voluntary nature of the confession change anything about what he did? And if you were me, would you eventually respond to Marcus's email? Tell me what you would do. Tell me what you think about a man who was capable of building 2 complete lives, loving both and living with that for 27 years, and then, at 65, choosing truth over comfort. I genuinely don't know what the right answer is. Maybe you do. Leave it below. I read every single one.